Now I'll write the story with completely new names not in that list. Read the letter first, then call your attorney. That's what I keep thinking about now. How those were the first two thoughts that came into my head when I found it. Not what is this or why didn't I know. Just read it. Then call someone who can help you. My grandmother raised me to be practical. Maybe that's why, even standing in a stranger's garage in Asheville, North Carolina, holding a water stained manila envelope with my name written on it in handwriting I hadn't seen in 3 years, I didn't cry. I just stood very still and breathed. Her name was Iris. Iris Vane. She was 74 years old when she died on a Sunday morning in October. And nobody called me until the following Wednesday. That detail still sits in my chest like something I swallowed wrong. I found out from a neighbor. Not from my mother. Not from my uncle. From a woman named Mrs. Alderton who lived 2 houses down and had my number because my grandmother had given it to her. Specifically, she told me later, in case something happened and your family doesn't tell you right away, those were her exact words. Mrs. Word. Alderton repeated them to me on the phone, her voice careful and deliberate, like she'd rehearsed them. I drove 6 hours from Charlotte the same afternoon. My grandmother's house was a small craftsman bungalow near the river, the kind with a covered porch and window boxes she kept full of herbs. She'd lived there for 31 years. It smelled like cedar and coffee and whatever she was always burning in that little clay dish by the back door. Some kind of dried lavender, I think. When I pulled up, the lights were on inside. My mother's car was in the driveway. So was my uncle's truck. I sat in my car for a minute before I went in. My mother, Roberta, came to the door before I could knock. She looked like she hadn't slept, or like she had slept too much. There's a look that happens either way, a kind of looseness around the eyes. She hugged me and said I was going to call you. I just needed a little time. I didn't say anything to that. I hugged her back and walked inside. My uncle Gareth was in the kitchen. He's my mother's older brother, 10 years older than her, and he has a way of taking up space in a room that I've never liked. Not because he's loud, but because he's quiet in a particular way. Like he's always calculating something. He shook my hand, said he was sorry for my loss. Like she wasn't his mother, too. I asked where Grandma's things were. My mother said they were taking care of it, which I understood a few minutes later to mean they had already started going through her belongings. The bedroom closet was half empty. There were cardboard boxes in the hallway. I asked if there was a will. Garrett said, "We're looking into it," and turned back to the counter. That was when I knew something was wrong. My grandmother was meticulous. She balanced her checkbook by hand every month. She kept her insurance documents in a labeled accordion folder in the hall closet, updated every January. She had a laminated card in her wallet with her blood type, her doctor's name, her attorney's number, and the location of her important documents. That card existed because she made it exist. She was not a woman whose affairs would need to be looked into. I didn't say any of that out loud. I went to the back bedroom, the one she used as a sewing room, and I sat down on the little bench by the window where she used to sit and watch the yard. I wasn't looking for anything. I just needed to be somewhere that still felt like her. The bench had a hinged lid, storage underneath, old fabric and notions. I'd sat on that bench probably 100 times. I knew the lid opened. I'd opened it before as a kid when she'd let me pick ribbon colors for whatever she was making. I don't know why I opened it that night. Maybe I just needed something to do with my hands. Under a folded piece of quilt patting and a Ziploc bag of buttons, there was a manila envelope. My name was on the front, not my granddaughter of Focali, but my full name, Calliope June Vane, in her careful, precise handwriting. Underneath, my name, underlined twice, open alone. I put it inside my jacket. I walked back through the house, told my mother I was going to get dinner, and drove to a parking lot 3 blocks away. I sat there under a flickering gas station light and I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, 7 pages in her handwriting, front and back. There was also a copy of her will, not the original, a copy, notarized, with a sticky note that said, "Original held by Whitmore and Associates, Asheville. Do not let them tell you otherwise." And there was a savings account statement from a credit union I didn't recognize, Appalachian Mutual, with a current balance of $263,000. My name was listed as the sole beneficiary. I read everything twice. Then I drove back to her house and got my overnight bag from my car, and I didn't say a word about any of it. I need to back up. To explain who my grandmother was and what she had and why any of this matters, Iris Vane spent 40 years as a paralegal. She retired at 65, which in retrospect is funny. She was sharper in retirement than most people are at their peak. She read constantly. She kept up with her former colleagues. She knew exactly what documents meant and exactly what people tried to do when they thought no one was paying attention. She owned her house outright. She had a modest investment account, a pension from the firm she worked at, Social Security, and, as I now knew, this credit union account I'd never heard of. My mother had been her financial power of attorney for the past 4 years. Since the fall that broke my grandmother's wrist and made everyone decide suddenly that she needed someone to help manage things. My grandmother had agreed, or appeared to agree, and I had been relieved at the time because I was living in Charlotte and couldn't be there every day. I regret that relief now. In the letter, my grandmother laid it out simply. She said she had noticed, beginning about 2 years into my mother's management of her accounts, that money was moving in ways she hadn't authorized, small amounts at first, then larger ones. She said she raised it with my mother twice and was told each time that she was confused, that the withdrawals were for her own expenses, that she simply wasn't remembering things correctly. She wrote, "I am not confused. I have never been confused. I know what I spend and I know what I earned and I know the difference." She said she had consulted quietly with a former colleague, a retired attorney named Sylvia, who did not appear in the letter by last name and had been advised on what to do. She opened the Appalachian Mutual account herself in person on a Tuesday when my mother thought she had a doctor's appointment. She transferred her savings there over the course of 8 months, small enough amounts that no single transfer would trigger a notice. She said, "I want you to know I did not enjoy this. I did not enjoy watching my own daughter and deciding I could not trust her. But I also did not enjoy being told I was losing my mind when I am not losing my mind. I am tired. And I want to make sure that when I am gone, what I have goes where I always intended." She left the house to be split between my mother and Gareth. She said she understood they had expectations and she wanted to be fair, and she had made peace with it. Everything else, the Appalachian Mutual account, her jewelry, her books, and the cedar chest in the bedroom, she left to me. The letter ended, "You were always the one who listened when I talked. I don't think you know how much that meant. Take care of yourself first. The rest will follow." I sat in my car outside her house for a long time after that. Then I called the number on the sticky note. Whitmore and Associates was a small estate law firm on Merrimon Avenue. I called at 7:30 in the morning, expected to leave a voicemail, and a real person answered. His name was Mr. Bai. Whitmore? Actually a Whitmore, the son of the woman who'd originally handled my grandmother's estate planning. And he said he'd been expecting to hear from someone in the family and was glad it was me. He had the original will. My grandmother had updated it 14 months before she died. He had a copy of the Appalachian Mutual account documentation. He had a letter from my grandmother, separate from the one she'd left me, addressed to him, authorizing him to act immediately upon notice of her death and to contact me directly if I hadn't reached out within 1 week. She was very organized, he said, and I could hear something in his voice. Not quite admiration, something closer to sadness. She came in alone. She took the bus. She made me promise not to discuss her visit with anyone who called claiming to be family. I met with him the next morning. I had not told my mother or Gareth anything. That morning, while I was getting dressed in the guest room, my mother knocked and came in without waiting. She sat on the edge of the bed and said very carefully that she wanted to talk about the house, about what Grandma would have wanted, about how the practical thing would be to sell it and divide the proceeds, and that she knew my grandmother had always intended for me to be included, and so of course I would receive a fair share. I said, "Okay, let's talk about that later." She looked at me for a moment longer than felt comfortable. Then she left. Gareth, at breakfast, mentioned that he'd been in touch with the bank where my grandmother had her primary checking account. Said there were some discrepancies they were working through. Said it in the way of a person who is hoping you won't know what that means. I drank my coffee and looked out the window. The meeting with Mr. Whitmore took 2 hours. He walked me through the will, which was clean and clear and unambiguous. He explained that because my grandmother had updated it within the past 2 years, it would likely withstand any challenge, particularly given that she had done so while clearly of sound mind and with full documentation of her reasoning. He also said carefully that he had already been in contact with the credit union regarding the beneficiary account, and that the funds were protected and in no way accessible to anyone other than me. Then he said something I hadn't expected. He said that in reviewing my grandmother's financial records, which she had provided to him in full when she updated the will, he had documented evidence of unauthorized transfers out of her primary account, totaling over approximately 22 months, around $47,000. He said, "Your grandmother was aware of this. She chose to document it rather than confront it directly. She left it to you to decide what to do with that information." I asked him what my options were. He explained them to me, methodically, the way my grandmother would have. I went back to the house that afternoon. My mother was on the porch when I got there. She had a cup of tea, and she looked like she wanted to have a real conversation, the kind we hadn't had in a long time. Maybe the kind we'd never had. She asked how I was holding up. She said she missed her mother. She said it with her eyes wet, and I believed her. I think that part was true. I think you can miss someone and still have wronged them. I think those things coexist. I sat down across from her. I said, "I know about the transfers." She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said they were for expenses, that my grandmother needed more care than anyone realized, that it was complicated, that she had sacrificed a lot of her own time and energy, and she deserved to be compensated. I said, "Did she agree to compensate you?" She looked at me. She said, she couldn't always remember things clearly toward the end. I said, she remembered clearly enough to hire an attorney, open a new account, and write me 7 pages of handwritten instructions. That was the last real conversation we had. I won't describe the legal process in detail because I wasn't at the center of it. That's not how civil and financial proceedings work. I provided Mr. Whitmore with everything my grandmother left me. He filed the appropriate documents. He referred the financial records to the appropriate authorities. Adult Protective Services in Buncombe County became involved. The district attorney's office eventually became involved. My uncle, it turned out, knew. Not the extent of it, he claimed, but he knew. There were text messages. There was a Venmo transaction, which I still find almost impossible to believe. Digital trails are unkind to people who think they're being careful. My mother was charged with financial exploitation of an elderly adult. In North Carolina, depending on the amount, that can be a Class F felony. The process took the better part of a year. She was convicted. I'm not going to write about the sentencing the way you might expect, with relief or satisfaction or a sense of closure. What I felt was mostly grief. Grief for my grandmother, who spent 2 years quietly protecting herself from her own daughter. Grief for the version of my mother I'd believed in. Grief for all of it. Gareth avoided criminal charges but was removed as a potential heir under the will's no contest clause, which my grandmother had included deliberately. Mr. Whitmore explained she had anticipated the possibility that someone might contest it. She had thought of everything. The house was sold. My grandmother had wanted it sold and the proceeds split, and even after everything I honored that. My portion went into an account I didn't touch for 6 months. The Appalachian Mutual account came to me without obstruction. $263,000 that my grandmother had protected, dollar by dollar, month by month, while telling no one. I think about her a lot, not in a haunted way, in a quiet way. I think about her on the bus to that credit union, doing the math in her head, making sure each transfer was small enough to be unremarkable. I think about her sitting across from Mr. Whitmore in his office on Merrimon Avenue, taking the bus because she didn't want to ask my mother for a ride. I think about the bench in the sewing room, the hinged lid, the way she chose that specific hiding place. The one I'd sat on since I was small, the one I would recognize, the one my mother probably wouldn't think to open, because my mother was never the one who sat with her in that room. She knew me. Even at the end, when everyone seemed to be deciding she didn't know much of anything anymore. She knew exactly who I was, and she trusted me, and she made sure I would find what she left. I live in Asheville now. I moved here about 8 months after everything concluded. I work remotely, same job. But I wanted to be near the river, near Mrs. Alderton, near the things that still feel like her. I kept the cedar chest. I kept her books. I kept the clay dish from beside the back door, and I burned the same dried lavender she used to burn. And sometimes in the mornings when the light comes in at a certain angle, I can almost feel her in the room. She was not a dramatic person. She would not want me to describe what she did as heroic. She would call it practical. She would say she simply made sure the right things ended up in the right hands. She would probably be annoyed that I'm emotional about it. That's fine. I'm emotional about it anyway. If you're listening to this and you have an elderly person in your life, a grandmother, a grandfather, a parent, anyone, please listen to them when they tell you something is wrong. Please don't assume that confusion is the default explanation for every concern they raise. My grandmother wasn't confused. She was surveilled and dismissed, and she handled it herself alone because she didn't believe anyone would take her seriously. She was right that no one would have, and she handled it anyway. I think about that bench. I think about her hands folding that envelope, writing my name, putting it underneath the quilt batting, lowering the lid. Open alone. She knew I'd remember the bench. She knew I'd open it. She knew somehow that I'd be the one who came when something happened, even if nobody called me. She was always the smartest person in any room she entered. She just never made a point of it. I miss her every single day, and I am so proud to have been hers. I've thought a lot about what my grandmother actually did. Not the legal part, not the account numbers or the notarized documents, but the decision she made in private, probably on some ordinary afternoon, to stop waiting for someone to believe her and start solving the problem herself. She didn't rage. She didn't make accusations she couldn't prove. She got on a bus. There's something about that image that I keep coming back to. A 74-year-old woman, former paralegal, 30 years of knowing exactly how these situations play out, getting on a city bus alone because she couldn't ask her daughter for a ride without tipping her hand. She sat down across from an attorney and laid out her situation with the same clarity she'd brought to 40 years of other people's crises. Then she went home and made dinner and didn't say a word. That takes a specific kind of strength that I don't think gets named often enough. It's not dramatic strength. It's not the kind that makes a good speech or a confrontational moment. It's the kind that shows up quietly over months in small, careful actions that only make sense in hindsight. My grandmother was ethical in a way that cost her something. She could have spent those 2 years angry and vocal and trying to get someone to listen. She had every reason to. Instead, she chose to document, protect, and leave me the tools to pursue justice on her behalf without requiring me to take her word for it. She gave me proof. She gave me options. She made sure that whatever I decided to do, I'd had the ground to stand on. That's moral intelligence. The ability to act rightly even when you're the one being wronged, even when no one's watching, even when the easier thing would be to either blow it up or let it go. I think about Roberta too, and I try to be honest about it. My mother made choices over 2 years that compounded into a felony conviction. I don't think she started out thinking of herself as someone who steals from her elderly mother. I think she started with a small rationalization. I'm doing so much, I deserve something for this. And then kept going because no one stopped her, and the money was there, and my grandmother kept telling her something was wrong, and it was easier to say you're confused than to stop. That's how it usually works. Not a villain's decision, but a series of small ones, each a little worse than the last, each one making the next one easier to justify. What my grandmother understood, and what I've had to sit with, is that people reveal themselves through their choices when they think no one is keeping score. She was keeping score. She was quiet about it, and precise, and she waited, and she made sure it mattered. I used to think patience was passive. Now I understand it as one of the hardest forms of active work there is. My grandmother did not wait because she was weak. She waited because she was building something. Every month, another small transfer. Every month, the evidence more complete. I try to carry that, not the grief of it, though that's there too, but the lesson underneath. When something is wrong, document it. When you're dismissed, don't collapse, get resourceful. When the people who should protect you don't, figure out who will. And if you're lucky, leave something behind that tells the people you love exactly who you were. She did that. In 700 pages, in a hinged bench in the sewing room, she told me exactly who she was. I already knew, but it meant everything to have it in her own words.